Music from the second Concerto for Orchestra by Robin Holloway. Oliver Knussen conducted the BBC Symphony Orchestra on that Gramophone award-winning NMC album. I'm James Jolly and welcome to this Gramophone Podcast. Robin Holloway is our guest this week to coincide with the publication of a new book, Music's Odyssey, an invitation to Western classical music. As well as a distinguished composer, he's Emeritus Professor of Music at the University of Cambridge, where I went to visit him a couple of weeks ago. Writing about music, which is something you do so beautifully and so eloquently, did it take you a long time to formulate a way of talking about music or writing about music?
No, not really. It came very naturally. I read English as an undergrad, and I enjoyed writing essays on poets and novels and so on. And I also was quite good at history essays and so on. Writing words came quite naturally. Music was obviously my chief passion all my life, and it was just applying the same ways of writing, thinking about it, to music itself. I did struggle as a student with musical aesthetics and things, and I gave up the struggle.
I mean, it's quite an art to find the balance between the technical and then, at the other hand, the very... I'm not exactly sure.
Kind of poetic, yeah. I try to keep both in play. As you know, the book is not an academic book. I try to do without technicalities, but some are needed. But it is for every man, every woman who loves music and just wants to sort of go a bit further with it. And I want to push them a bit further, or suggest and open another door and say, there's also this, and there's this, and this is why. When I read English here as an undergrad, it was still very much the school of Dr. Leavis, and that was very judgmental. It preferred this, it favoured that, it disfavoured that. It was very moralistic almost in saying why. I inherited that, and then I thought, this is rigid and a bit fanatical, puritanical, and it omits so much. It only permits a rigid, tiny canon that tick all the boxes. I couldn't live with that beyond about the age of 18 or 19,
How did this whole project start? Because, I mean, this is a massive undertaking. I mean, does this go back years, or is it a sort of, is this a COVID thing, or how did it start?
Well, I've been talking, listening to music, thinking about it, talking with friends, going to concerts since I was a kid. So it's the fruit of a lifetime. Then I've taught here for years and years and tried essentially to do what I'm doing. I just wanted to put it over. I wanted to invite. Here's a great big journey, or here's a feast, or here's a beautiful Aladdin's treasure cave or something. So that's a lifelong impulse. Both my parents were teachers. I'm a didactic type, but it's not didactic. No, I want to share. This is a feast, and it's yours. It belongs to everyone. And that more specifically, I suppose I got the invitation from Stuart Prophet of Penguin, I suppose, round about the time when I retired from the faculty. Retirement was compulsory. They kicked you out. 67. It's not fair, is it? Most people have got a lot more to teach, possibly more material, I was at a loose end because I wasn't getting many commissions for performance. That was beginning to dry out around about then. And Stuart had liked my occasional journalism, which had been gathered in a couple of volumes. He'd seen volumes of essays, and he liked it and thought, maybe what about a big book that joined up all the dots? And this is a marvellous letter to get, and I, of course, accepted with pleasure, and then got stuck. And it got blocked, and I got a bit depressed and couldn't make progress. Quite a lot of the book, I mean, it does recycle some of that old material. I'm joining the dots, like Stuart said. And some of the sections I could use almost unchanged. But gradually I became aware of different public policies, the idea of a progression, of a journey, of a succession. And so the old bits were modified and new bits added, and gradually it began to flow. And eventually the trickle turned into a waterfall. And the original version was not quite twice too long. And then followed inevitable, painful cutting. I had to cut it 5 times. That was terribly dispiriting, especially as I didn't think it was too long. It just had more, it was like a big building with lots of side chapels. And gradually the side chapels had to be eliminated and you just stuck to the nave and the
There's
trumpets.
probably a physical size that actually the human hand can't get round,
Yeah.
which is probably predicates how big a book can
Oh,
be.
oh no, it would have been too big physically for the volume that eventuates is about the biggest you can get in one volume without it falling apart. No, I begged for 2 volumes, but they said we don't do two volumes. So I just had to bite the bullet and feel the cut of the knife into my flesh like the version of Venice, The last cut, I couldn't do it a 5th time. And a friend saw that and very kindly took that on and did it with very, very scrupulously, very carefully. He'd seen the whole thing. He knew my way of writing and had suggested further cuts, to which I mostly agreed. Or anyway, it was up for debate, and that just about did the trick. And both he and Stuart said, I want more in 2 places. You don't want more, you want less. No. Less is more, or the other way around. They wanted more on Chopin, and they wanted a brief discussion of Vivaldi. And so I obliged.
I mean, Chopin's an interesting one. I was doing some reading recently about Chopin because I had to do something, write something for the Chopin competition. And it's hard to think of a composer where such a large proportion of his music is actually core repertoire. There aren't many composers who, have given us so much that is consistently there.
Yes. But that is because it's just the one thing.
Well, it's very narrow focus, if one can say that.
Yes. I mean, he's the opposite of Protean. I'm not admitting to an aversion, but I don't love it deeply. I admire, I see the greatness, I see the originality, I see in some cases, the absolute perfection of what he's done. But it doesn't quite reach my soul in the way that his contemporary Schumann does. In very comparable things, in the body of Panna works, for instance, forgetting about Schumann's symphonies and oratorios and stuff. But just, I don't know what it is. I think I'm a bit of a Hun. I'm rather Teutonic.
It's funny because I think I'd always assumed you were more of a sort of Francophile until I read this book. And I think it's purely because I think the first time I ever encountered your writing was the chapter you did on the Pelléas and Mélisande for Alan Blythe's opera on record.
Indeed, yes.
And I think that kind of stuck in my... And then I was reading this and then I stumbled across that bit where you said, if somebody said, who is your favourite composer? And you say, unthinkingly, I'd probably say Bruckner.
Yes.
And I was quite surprised.
Yes.
Gosh, have I got this all wrong?
Yes. Perhaps it is surprising. Well, I remember one I had when I was really stuck, early 20s, in composition, and just didn't know what to do, and had left university and was living at home, not very comfortably, doing really awful garroty jobs, paying my keep. I wasn't a parasite, but I felt it was the wrong thing. Trying to compose and failing. I had a very helpful session with Hans Keller, who was extremely kindly and solicitous and a good old-fangled Freudian, just right. And at one point in our long conversation, he said, "Who would you like to study with? What composer?" Meaning living, of course. And I thought very hard, and as if extracted from me with pain, I said, Debussy and Bruckner. And he laughed, of course. And he suggested various names, which meant nothing to me at all when I was going to Sandy. But Sandy is a wonderful friend. But it wasn't composition lessons. We just talked about music. I think he realised that the composition lessons were just pointless. You just do it. You get on with it as best you can. You know what a crotchet and a quaver is. And a sharp puts it up and a flat. You've got all that. Just got to get writing that music and finding what it might be. But so Hans suggested various names which didn't excite me at all for having lessons from. And then he said, your problem in one word. I can't imitate him. Your problem in one word. Brahms. That's meant to be utterly provocative and make you think. I didn't know what to think, but I gradually thought I didn't like Brahms. Then I had problems with Brahms because I'd come down that line with Bruckner and then Wagner. And Brahms just didn't, he just seemed fusty. And slowly over the next years, I got into Johannes through playing the late piano pieces, making the notes yourself. Those wonderful late pieces. Then chamber music. I always had problems with the orchestra and the heavier, the more sort of leather-clad Brahms, But gradually got there. I heard of 2 orchestral conversions, one illegitimate, the Schoenberg orchestration of the G minor piano quartet, which I just thought, wow, this is got it after all. But that's not exactly, it's marvelous, but it's not exactly Brahms.
No.
But exactly Brahms was the Second Symphony conducted by Monteur, which takes away it just lightens the textures. It's very cantabile. It's absolutely loving and understanding, but it just doesn't, it's taken away that sort of get this sort of quality. And so that let me into the rest. But I still don't quite know what he meant by Brahms being my problem as a composer. Oh, he's a help of it, isn't like all the music you love, it's eventually a help.
When you were talking about, possibly working with Sandy Gurr, you said we talk about music. Do you think when composers talk about music, is it a different kind of aesthetic reception to how a concert goer, pluck someone from the Barbican or the festival hall and talk to them about music? It's a bit like me saying, how do you listen to music as a composer? Because you'll just turn around and say, well, I don't know because I've never listened to music not as a composer.
No. I don't think there's much, unless the talk is specifically technical.
So, yeah.
I think it's much the same thing. It was likes and dislikes, appreciations, non-appreciations, anecdotal. He was, he seemed to have met everyone getting around in the years when he was an avant-gardist. He'd been to the Messiaen class, he knew Boulez and so on. He knew people in Germany. So that was a whiff of non-provinciality, which is just terrific. And I think it was more anecdotal. And as I said, very soon, any attempt at formal instruction, I think he wanted to do classic old Schoenbergian routines, and I just was bored and didn't do it, or did it indifferently or badly, and he saw that was futile waste of time. But we enjoyed talking so much. We talked about other things too. We talked about reading. What he was a very widely read man, and that was just life enhancing in otherwise rather dreary years, doing O levels and A levels, and being lousy at sport and not getting on well at school. In other words, and this is a relief, a bit of human warmth and culture. The rest of which I got from third program, as was fantastic, and concerts in London. As modern music began to get going in London, then along came the Thursday invitation concerts, which were fantastic, and you either heard them broadcast or you just went along and heard them do the Martyrs en Marche or whatever. Fabulous.
It is an extraordinary achievement. I mean, it's 1,100 pages. You're covering about 900 years, so basically from sort of Perrotin to the present day. Yeah. More or less chronologically, with some little diversions, and then going back, as it were, to sort of pick up people you do in the narrative.
Yeah.
When you stand back and you look at this vast journey, I mean, it's called Music's Odyssey, which gives the impression that we're talking about. Yeah. Do you see a sort of a continuity? Because there are sort of, and I hope we can come on and talk about this, the people who break the narrative, as it were, and send music off in a different direction.
Absolutely, yes. Standing back further, there's the continuity, there's the huge journey. But if you think of the Homeric parallel, there's lots and lots of adventures in separate places. It takes 10 years for Ulysses to get home and so on. And they have adventures and misadventures on the way, and sometimes reversals and, disasters. And then the next thing is all right and so on. And eventually he makes it, and Penelope's still there, So as you say, there are decisive moments in the long journey where it's a new start, and it's as if the new view of what music can do and what it's for, its possibilities, almost inevitably involve a rejection of what's been achieved so far. Like Monteverdi, a style based on figured bass and declamation recitative. It's got no room for elaborate polyphony that had been brought to its perfection in the generation before, down some centuries. So that's almost a revolution. I don't think Monteverdi set out to be revolutionary, but in effect, it's a new start. And I think there have been several other new starts of that kind. The next being the classical style. Haydn, the complete summation of learned counterpoint in Bach, combined with profound affective content, was of no use to people who wanted to write sonatas, string quartets, and so on. It just didn't serve them anything. It's not a revolution, it's not a rejection, but it is a new start. And I suppose it's a change of direction. And then gradually what one sees after both these revolutions is the eventual enrichment of the new thing by what's been rejected. By the time you've reached later Haydn, later Mozart, Beethoven, what had apparently been useless is in fact absolutely central to the new achievement. And so later in the Baroque century, after the century or so after Monteverdi, something like Purcell has got a lot of the old reborn together with all the new. And you get these marvellous fusions and sorts of syntheses. And I think that happened again with modernism. Kick it all out, start again. All that dead sort of post-Brahms, post-Wagner, all that imitation Debussy. Start again, 1920-ish. Back to Baroque, clean, functional, purposeful, no emotional turmoil, and no impressionistic mood painting, picture painting. Music is abstract, music about music. And that's a rejection, which eventually, like the other things, eventually can incorporate what it's rejected and come to the enrichment of both.
If somebody sort of said, now you've read the book, who were the sort of game changers? I don't think it would necessarily be the people that some people would expect you to say. You've said Monteverdi, I would probably agree with you, Haydn, but Mozart, it seems to be that there are sort of people like Mozart and Beethoven who took what they were given from someone like Haydn and expanded it and enriched it. But actually, did they change the course of music?
I think enrich is right. It's not change. It is just incorporate what had previously been of no use. Mozart's fascination with strict counterpoint enormously enriches his style. Alas, not for that many years, but one sees it, the magic flute, very clearly. The polyphonic, the thinking, even alongside lightness and playfulness and sparkling glockenspiels and things. Certainly Beethoven, the last quartets are not just the grosse fuga, but they're imbued with intense, closely worked counterpoint that knows it's Bach. It's not Bachian, but it just knows it. And next stop, Master Singers, which also knows it's Bach and knows it's Beethoven. I think these incompatibles prove compatible after all.
I find a composer like Beethoven fascinating because, whatever form he took, he made it bigger, he made it more ambitious, he made it more expressive, it made it more capable of doing what he obviously wanted it to do.
Yes. But that's not to diminish the richness and the fullness of Matthias Haydn or
Absolutely
Mozart.
not.
Not at all. No, he does take it to new places, but they are instinct with what is inherited.
When you get to the end of the 19th century, I think we would probably say Wagner is one of these kind of disruptors, to use a sort of buzzword of today.
Yes.
Who do you think came next after that?
Well, first of all, let me disagree about Wagner. He's also a fulfiller. And somewhere in the book, I talk about a non-historical nexus between Bach, Schubert, Wagner. That's not an historical thing. That's just they have so much in common in what they're trying to achieve, which is intensity of expression by whatever technical means they can command. And the affective side of Bach can sort of be mirrored by the affective side of Schubert. And then that just makes the living tissue of Wagnerian leitmotivic commentary, whether it's telling an heroic tale or whether it's exploring the tormented insides of Tristan and Isolde, or the tormented side of Amphitrite. Yes, that's a sort of affinity which is non-historical. Although Virgil Thompson did say, "What's Wagner but Lieder louder?" You heard that one?
Yes, that's very good.
Yeah. And Wagner was very, obviously, utterly aware of Beethoven, but he was pretty well aware of Bach, probably through Liszt's championship and Liszt's transcriptions of organ music, and Liszt said horrible organ music.
I mean, what's interesting about Wagner is the effect he had on composers who came after him. I mean, it was, you either embraced it or you rejected it. There doesn't seem to be much sort of middle ground.
Yes, of course. He's the biggest explosion, disruption within the terms of the art that the art has ever had. And of course, naturally, part of its aim is to go beyond the terms of the art, to embrace everything, to embrace all the arts, to embrace all human life, to embrace all saga and mythology and religion. Pretty inordinate. If he hadn't been a wonderful composer, it would have just been grotesque.
Yes.
But in fact, he was a great composer as well, so he was able to achieve these unprecedented things. And that after such a disturbance, it's very difficult for the next generations to know quite what to do. More of the same, ridiculous. Revolt against it, reject it. Well, they didn't want to, they loved it so much. I can't think of any composer in that following generation who didn't adore Wagner and wasn't soaked in it, whatever their paths forward. It's not a kicking over. It's a what can we do? Continue along the same lines, like broadly speaking Strauss, but Straussifying it, If he'd written pastiche, it would have just been epigonic and futile. Finding ways forward, Mahler very differently, Debussy going dead against, but finding new resources inside the small details of Wagner, which become the part bases of a new language, a new way of putting music together. I love this chord. I love this chord from Parsifal. What could I do with it without Parsifal?
Yeah.
And Sibelius, I think, is soaked in Wagner, as he said himself, but finds a very independent path forward.
Because in a way, he sort of absorbs Wagnerism, but actually translates it into a different genre. Because obviously, Wagner is operatic, Sibelius is symphonic.
I don't know. I mean, the early tone poems of Sibelius are heroic mythological, from Finnish rather than Teutonic mythology. And his letters testify to the fact that he was completely overwhelmed by the Wagner works. And I can hear the traces of the sound right through to Tapiola. Elgar obviously is saturated in Wagner, sometimes to his disadvantage. That awful Angel of the Agony in Eugorontius, it's the Angel of Amfortas's agony, very much. But other bits of Elgar are O Wagner, a debt which is entirely to Elgar's benefit. They've opened out something that he can really do that's his own. I think the only one who's of that epoch who just didn't need it is Fauré. But again, he's not Philistine about Wagner. He doesn't have to reject. He acknowledges, he loves it, and it's not no particular use to him in what he's going to do. Chamber music, piano music, songs, gradually refining his own language out of French predecessors, out of Schumann, out of Gounod, out of Saint-Saëns and so on, out of Chopin, of course, into something utterly rarefied that's himself, that doesn't have a trace of music drama in it. He did write an opera, and it's got leitmotifs, but it's not very Wagnerian. Pelléas used to be seen as totally reacting against Wagner, but actually it's more Wagnerian than Fauré's opera.
Yeah, I mean, Pelléas is just, it's one of those works that I'm obsessed with and I come back to regularly. And it's funny, every time I see it, it's one of those pieces you think, on the surface, I know what the story is. But then I sort of come away thinking, but what's it really about?
What's it really about? I think it's sort of, so I was trying to think of the right kind of philosophical word. But it's about loneliness. It's about inability to connect, surely.
Yeah.
the opposite of Werner, which is all about connection. I mean, with Titanic love duets, even when the man has purportedly died, there's still joined forever. And I think that Pelléas is about non-connection, misunderstanding, misapprehension. The lovers don't quite make it. She's mysterious to them all. She's mysterious to her husband, to her father-in-law, who more or less says these things. There's a line about having pity on the hearts of men, which Arkell sings. Obviously, between the lover and the husband, there's no understanding. Do you remember the scene where Golo takes Pelléas down to the depths and shows him the stagnant waters that underlie everything? Well, that's highly symbolic. And he's tempted to kill his brother-in-law. And then sort of the moment passes, he remits, and they emerge to sparkling midday sun on the sea. But we're not going to forget that dark scene. It underlies everything. Then later you see Golo with his little boy, with the child, utter non-connection, and then getting the child to spy on the lovers. And it's about attrition and loss of connection. And if it's about anything, I don't want to say that's its subject, but my goodness, that does loom everywhere. And eventually she just disappears. Pelléas is dead. The others have got to live on somehow with all that. It's the turn of the little boy. Yet there's no hope in that. Remember the end of Wozzeck? At the end, Murray's been murdered. Wozzeck has drowned himself. And the children are playing, including their little illegitimate child, playing on his hobby horse. And it's hopeless. It's a sort of kind of upbeat ending, which, another one, the upbeat ending to Porgy and Bess. Yes. Which persuades no one. Alas, the poor man off to the big city in his, donkey cart or something, to find his girl and rescue her from the depravities of the metropolis. It's absolutely hopeless. It's a Hollywood, Broadway upbeat ending, all optimism, but no one's fooled.
Yet less dramatic than that. I always think the end of Rosenkavalier, you just think, we have this sort of transcendental moment. You just think, actually, wind forward a year, the Marschallin would have found another Octavian, and the cycle will go on again.
Yes.
Or Octavian will come back and say, look, I made a terrible mistake.
Yes. So what ends in genuine radiance and fulfillment?
I mean, I guess you could argue the end of Fidelio, but I always think Fidelio, by the time you get to the last act, it turns from being an opera into an oratorio.
The music isn't so good.
And the music isn't so good.
I agree. Utterly affirmative would be the end of The Cunning Little Vixen.
Yes.
But the vixen's been shot.
Yes.
But
if ever an opera it's the cycle of life.
Cycle of renewal.
Yeah,
and so I think that music makes you feel that.
Yeah. I did actually, funny, I found the chapter on Janacek wonderful to read, because I got the feeling that you admire this composer so much, from your writing about it.
But don't I admire most of the ones
you do, but there was just, maybe it's because I love Janacek, and I just thought, actually, here's a sort of kindred spirit writing about this.
Right, yes. Oh no, I'm trying to write with love and veneration and delight. Another one I think has shown more relish than elsewhere would be the Gershwin chapter.
Absolutely.
Actually.
Absolutely.
And Ives.
I was very struck in the book. You come up with it. It's a kind of reworking of the Frostian, the road not taken, the way not taken. And I remember stumbling when I was reading it. I was rather obsessed a few weeks ago, and I listened to it quite a lot of times, of Mahler's Das Klagende Lied. And then I stumbled across you talking about particular works of the way not taking. So composers who write something early, Sibelius's Kulero Symphony is another example. Yeah. And then they veered away from that. And I get the sense that you've regretted that. I mean, particularly in Mahler's case, where you single out the Fourth Symphony as being, an almost perfect work.
Yes.
But have major problems with the others.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I heard the Fourth a couple of weeks ago at the Festival Hall. And I thought, all over again, this is just perfection. It's just absolutely right for him. There's a tendency to take on big slightly bogus subjects like death and resurrection. I mean, I'm sure they're very important and big, but this has become a bit of stage machinery. By the end of the late 19th century, it's religios, it's bombastic. Culmination number 8, which is awful. The other symphonies are full of marvelous ideas. My problems are different there. The actual material of number 8 just seems to me bottom drawer. Take 9. I mean, the first one to 9 is magnificent. Enough said. Stop, please. But this obligation to do a 4-movement symphony with a scherzo and I think they're not so good. In some cases, actually rather poor. People differ about the adagio. Some people are just a bit moved to the depths. I find it a bit religiose. But anyway, I don't want it. He's achieved a magnificent 1-movement structure of enormous complexity and variety and depth. He said it all. Stop. And I find that sort of problem elsewhere in 5, 6, and 7. Number 3, just to go back, that's a different case. It's a suite. It's sort of poetic suite, programmatic, birds, flowers, beasts, angels, children, love of God. Yeah, again, the love of God is not so good. It's a bit sanctimonious, that last one. And then finally, as we know, it would have been what the child tells me, which luckily gets away and informs the whole of the next symphony in the most beautiful way. So everything is contingent upon everything else. And I think you must have noticed that I think he might have got it right in number 10. But we know fate intervened. But it has actually a sort of poetic yet architectural shape that might resolve all these things into one large structure. But again, it's not, some of the material is just not up to it. It's very much of a rough draft, incomplete as such, so it's tragic. And I love the Clock and the Lead because it's perfect in what seems to be natural to him. Fairy tale, mixture of song cycle, symphonic elements, operatic elements, the right kind of subject, including some very painful things that are very germane to him, treated in fairy tale manner, but not evaded, and a perfect shape, and wonderful ideas. So that's a way not taken.
Why do you think Mahler's music is incredibly popular at the moment? I mean, I can remember, if I go back 20, 30 years, a music director arrives at a new orchestra. First thing they put in the program is a Beethoven cycle. Now we've got to do all the Mahlers.
Yes. I came in on the first wave. I heard the opening of number 1. I thought, fantastic. Then I got number 4. There weren't recordings even. But then gradually, not very good LPs trickled through. I remember some of them came from Holland, where Mahler, of course, the Mahler tradition never died. And then gradually they began to perform and then recorded really well, and everyone took it up. And I remember that first wave. It was just, it just appealed to the zeitgeist. One, it was new, it was unfamiliar, it was unhackneyed. I suppose that when you're 14 or 15, that something like the end of the Resurrection Symphony doesn't seem like cardboard and plasterwork.
I mean, I also wonder whether it's something that, when you go to the cinema these days, everything is huge, everything is incredibly loud.
Yeah.
And somehow Mahler kind of fits into that.
Yes. I think there's been a second wave, and as you say, it has now become firm, hardcore rep, which does fit in with Star Wars, and but it also fits in with angst and deprivation and his alienation, all those things. Still, it mirrors them, and you can't get those things from Bruckner or Brahms. Brahms doesn't do alienation and deprivation. Brahms is very well fed, and so is Bruckner in his way.
I mean, I think it's probably the biggest accolade I can give is that reading this book has sent me off to listen again to pieces of music that I haven't heard for ages. I think, gosh, I must have it. I mean, I'm just trying to think. Henze's Undine, for example. I I remember when a recording came out, I think it was the Oliver Knussen one, and I was completely obsessed about it, and I just thought this was sensational music. And then, as
Disappears.
it disappears,
Yeah.
and then I stumbled across it in your book, and I must go back.
Yeah.
I went back, and I thought, wow, I can remember exactly
Yeah.
the feeling I had when I first heard it.
It's very generous, isn't it? It's copious. Yeah. Well, look, you said the nicest thing anyone could possibly say about a book. It makes the reader want to hear these things. That's all I ask. Just get out there and listen, and then explore.
Music from the score for the ballet Undine by Werner Henze. The London Sinfonietta was conducted by Oliver Knussen on that DG recording. One of the many works that Robin Holloway's book Music's Odyssey had me playing once again. Music's Odyssey has just been published by Alan Lane, an imprint of Penguin Books. Gramophone podcasts are free, so if you enjoy them, then a really great way to support our work is to take out a subscription to Gramophone magazine. Over 13 issues a year, we bring you hundreds of reviews by our expert critics, as well as in-depth articles about the latest classical music releases and the most exciting musicians of the day. And if you head over to gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and enter the code podcast20 in the checkout, you can even get a 20% discount off any subscription package. We really value your support. And consider leaving a review or rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And do look out for another Gramophone podcast very soon.